Today's daf is daf Chaf Vav. And the Gemara starts with a kashi on the top of daf Chaf Vav. And this has to do with the Kal V'chomer, which is presented here on Chaf Heyam and Beis on the bottom. And the input, or shall we say the purpose or the goal of this Kal V'chomer was to darshan a chiyuv, derive a chiyuv of keren b'chotza nizak. And it was based on the fact that shein v'regel is chamur vis-a-vis keren, because shein v'regel is chayav b'rshus harab nezek sholem, whereas keren is only chayav chatzi nezek. And yet, shein v'regel b'rshus hanizak pays nezek sholem. So keren, which is more chamur, and we prove that from Rishus Harabim, then shein v'regel certainly should be chayav nezek sholem in b'rshus hanizak. So the Gemara asks the question: Midei kula kamrinon, halga kamrinon. So again, let's just go over this one more time, because again, we got to get this, this straight. Shein v'regel will pay nezek sholem in chatzad nizak. That makes shein v'regel more chamur than keren, and keren is chayav b'rshus harab. So therefore, shein v'regel should be chayav in rishus harab. So we're going to derive, in the absence of a special pasuk, which the Gemara is going to now activate, the conclusion from this Kal V'chomer that shein v'regel should be chayav in rishus harab, because shein v'regel are more chamur than keren in rishus hanizak. So the Gemara says, Midei kule kamrinon, palga kamrinon. We didn't want to derive from this Kal V'chomer that in the case of shein v'regel he should be chayav nezek sholem. We only wanted to derive the conclusion that he should be chayav chatzi nezek. And therefore, if you're going to quote the pasuk ubir b'stei acher, I'm going to use that pasuk ubir b'stei acher to tell me that in the case of shein v'regel he only pays chatzi nezek. So we're going to derive from the Kal V'chomer that shein v'regel in rishus harabim should pay chatzi nezek, and the pasuk b'stei acher is going to teach me that if there was a hezek in rishus harabim, they don't have to pay nezek sholem, but they do pay chatzi nezek based on this Kal V'chomer from keren. So the Gemara answers no. On Makra, the pasuk says with regard to tashlumei keren, v'chatzu is kaspo. So what does this word kaspo teach me? It's a miut. Kaspo shel zeh, v'lo kaspo shel acher. Only in the case of keren do we do what's called v'chatzu is kaspo, and we divide up the tashlumei nezek into half. But in other cases of the avos nezikin, like shein v'regel, it's an either or situation. Either you pay nezek sholem, or you don't pay at all. There's no middle of the road compromise of chatzi nezek. Is memela, I understand very well that I cannot derive from this Kal V'chomer a chiyuv of chatzi nezek in the case of shein or regel b'rishus hara, because it's either potur or chayav nezek shon. There's no middle of the road, and that we derive from v'chotzu is kaspo dafka kaspo shel keren, but not kaspo shel shein v'regel. Gemara now asks another kasha. What about the following kal v'chom? Why not suggest that lotei shein v'regel chayevis b'shusad nizek al chatzi nezek bilvat? Maybe we should come to the conclusion that if we can prove that Karen is more chomer than shein v'regel, because Karen is chayev b'shus harabim and shein v'regel is poter b'shus harabim, then we should come to the conclusion that b'shus hanizak we cannot be more machmir in shein v'regel than we can be in the case of Karen, and that means that shein v'regel b'shus hanizak should only pay chatzi nezek. Uma Karen sheb'shus harabim chayeves, so that makes Karen more chomer than shein v'regel. Is b'shus hanizak edim shal v'esel chatzi nezek? It's a short time that pays chatzi nezek is shein v'regel. She b'shus harabim p'tura is kal, therefore einu din she b'shus hanizak mishalim rak chatzi nezek. And the Gemara answers once again a pasuk. On my kra, pasuk says in Parshas Mishpatim, v'shilachas be'iro uvir b'stei acher meitiv sadeh meitiv kabla yishalem. And what is the mashmos? What is the meaning of the word yishalem? It means tashlumim ma'alya. It means a full payment, a total compensation. That's nezek sholem. So therefore, the Torah is telling us in shein v'regel that you pay nezek sholem in Rishus HaNizak. Gemara asks another kasha. Okay, you don't want to derive from a kal v'chomer the p'tur of shein v'regel. Why don't you derive from a kal v'chomer a p'tur in Keren? V'lo tehei Keren Rishus harabim chayav. How can you tell me that the Torah is more machmir in shein v'regel, and yet in Rishus harabim shein v'regel is potter? Now you're going to turn around and say the Karen has to pay in Rishus harabim? Now again, the Gemara is purely on a theoretical, conceptual level of kal v'chomers. The Gemara never bothers asking, why did the Torah say that shein v'regel is potter Rishus harabim, and why would that logic not apply in the case of Karen? None of that is being discussed over here. Like, for example, maybe say the following, that in the case of shein v'regel b'shus harabim, you're bringing your animals in Rishus harabim, you should be very careful about watching your animal, muzzle them or whatever, that they shouldn't eat, they shouldn't stumble on things, and so forth and so on. But Karen, you don't have to anticipate that all of a sudden the animal is going to gore your animal and kill your animal. But the Gemara is totally oblivious to that. We're purely on a level of, it's like Brisker Lumdus, it's all theoretical, it's all conceptual. Belote Karen b'shus harabim chayav mikal v'chomer. We should say that a Karen b'shus harabim is potur, because ma shein v'regel are more chomer than Karen she'im b'shus hanizak nezek sholem, and b'shus harabim p'tura is Karen she'b'shus hanizak is the only pays chatzi nezek, so that makes it kal vis-a-vis shein v'regel. Eino din she'b'shus harabim p'tura, it should be potur b'shus harabim. And once again, the Gemara is going to quote a pasuk. Amar Rav Yochanan, Amar Kra, again in Parshas Mishpatim. It says, "V'chatzu es kaspo v'gam es hames yechetzun." And the word yechetzun is totally superfluous. And it's coming to teach me the din of chatzi nezek in Keren, that it applies in every rishus, whether it's rishus hanizak or rishus harabim, ve'in chatzi nezek choluk lo b'shus harabim lo b'shus hayachid. So therefore, in Chotzer Nizak, we have a chiyuv of chatzi nezek, of Keren, and we're going to apply that to rishus harabim. And that's the right for the pasuk Yechetzun. Frek the Gemara v'yehei Adam chai b'kofer mikal v'chomer. We know that if a shar kills a human being, then the Baal Shar has to pay kofer. And we also know that Adam is more chomer than shar. So if shar pays kofer, then certainly Adam should pay kofer. Again, this goes into a whole sugi of Kimlev the Ramina, but we're not going down that way. But what's the Kavachom? Uma shor is kal. She'eno chayev bi'arba dvarim. So you only pay for nezek. You don't pay for tzar ripu shavas and poshes. If a shor was chovel bi'adam, and nevertheless chayev b'kofer. If the shor kills a person, he's chayev kofer. So that means that shor is kal, and adam is chomer. Why is adam chomer? Shechayev bi'arba dvarim. A chovel is chayev b'chamisha dvarim. Nezek in another 4. Is edo din shei chayev afa kofer. And once again, the Gemara answers apostle. On my crow, with regard to a shar that kills a man, it says kechala sheyushas olav, and the extra olav is a miut olav, meaning on the shar, meaning the pilot of the shar has to pay to make kofer v'lo adam. In fact, the Gemara, now that we established that a shar is more chomer because he's chayiv in kofer, and an adam is potter in kofer, that we derive from olav is yehei shar chayiv harbod farim. Why don't we say that a shar that was chomer by adam is chayiv in harbod dvarim? Mikal v'chomer uma adam is relatively calm. Because if he's responsible for the death of another human being, Eino Chai B'Kofer, he doesn't have to pay kofer. And that we derive from the pasuk, the miut of olav is nevertheless Chai B'Arba Dvarim. So even though relative to shar Adam is kal, and yet he's Chai B'Arba Dvarim, is shar achamur shechai B'Kofer, Eino din she Chai B'Arba Dvarim. And once again, we need a drasha near to the pasuk to teach me that a shara mazik adam does not pay arba dvarim. On Makra, the pasuk says, "Vayikra chav daled ish ki yiteimun be'amiso." And what does it mean ba'amiso? Ba'amiso means that it was like the ish who did the damage. In other words, who committed the murder, and that means only adam, and that's called amiso. V'lo shar ba'miso. Iboilahu. Now, normally, when you talk about kofer, it's because Yashar killed a human being. That's called keren. That's negicha. But the Gemara wants to know regel shedar sal gabitina b'chatza nizak mao t'shatzal kofer. Is the chiyuv kofer for shosh haragas ha'adam limited to keren, or can apply even to regel? That's called darsa. So as the animal was walking, Nebuchadnezzar it trampled to death the child, and maybe the Baal Hashar should pay kofer, like a keren that kills. So now the Gemara analyzes the study asafa. Me, I'm reading, should we say that the din of regel is midi davia keren, which means that just like in the case of keren, when you chayiv to pay kofer, that's only keren came in the oven's tray, utlosas in the archiv. The animal proves itself to be a muad after it kills 3 times, and then you pay kofer. Hachinami, we should say the same thing, that regel already on the first time around of darsa v'misa, since it's kedarka, is loshna. We should be mechayiv the bailam kofer, and even on the first round. Just 1 second to make sure I'm telling you the truth here. Oh, he says here, the ein chiluk bein regel lekeren muedis, which means that regel, even on the first round, should be chayiv kofer, because it's kidarka, it's like a shor muad, it's like keren muedis. Oh, Dilma, should we say, keren kavanos lahazik, hai ein kavanos lahazik? In other words, in regel, the animal's aware of the fact that it's stepping on, in this case, a human being, but it didn't have any belligerent and deliberate intention to kill a human being. It was just walking in its normal path. But Karen is kavanos lahazik. And the chiyuv of kofer is because of kavanos lahazik, and it doesn't apply therefore to regel, because regel shedorsa is ain't kavanos lahazik. Toshma, let's come to some conclusion based on a brayso. Hichnis, he takes his shor and he brings it into his shor into chatzav alabayis shalo bershus unegacha lebalabayis vames. Is hashor beskila, because it killed a human being. Ubalav bein tabu bein muad mishalim kofer sholem divrei Rabbi Tarf. So Rabbi Tarfon holds that in Chotzer Nizak you pay in Keren Nezek Sholem, and it doesn't matter whether it's Tam or Muad, and that's going to apply to Kofer, and therefore, even though the animal is a short Tam, but nevertheless in the Chotzer Nizak, it would pay Nezek Sholem. When I say Nezek Sholem here in this context, I mean Kofer Sholem. And the Gemara clarifies this. Kofer Sholem b'tam l'Rabbi Tarfon minole. How does Rabbi Tarfon know that there should be a chiyuv of Kofer Sholem, even though it's a short time, it hasn't proved itself? Lav, isn't it true that his reasoning is Mishum T'Sav Alek Rabbi Yossi Aglili? The Yomi says in a brayso that short time, Mishalim Chatzi Kofer b'Shus Rab, that there is a chiyuv Kofer of Chatzi Kofer in Rishus Rab. And now we're going to say that in Rishus Hanerag, he's going to pay Nezek Sholem, meaning Kofer Sholem. Umaisi Le, and Rabbi Tarfon derived his shita to be Mechayev Kofer, a Kofer Sholem b'Chatzer Nizak mikal v'chomer miregel. Regel is relatively kal because it's P'tur B'Shus Rab. And if it kills B'Chotzer HaNizak, you pay Kofer Sholem, is Keren, which is more chomer, that you pay even in Rishus Rabim. Therefore, it should certainly be Chayev Kofer Sholem in the Chotzer HaNizak. So again, in the case of regel, if it kills b'chotzer nizak, you pay kofer sholem, which the Gemara had established earlier in the first tzad, urchen. Is alma, we see the ika kofer b'regel. So you had a suffix whether or not we should treat the regel like the Karen as far as kofer, because it's urche and it's like Karen after the third negicha, or should we say no, that it's ain't kavanos lahazik? But here we see clearly that the premise of this brisa is that there is kofer b'regel. Gemara rejects. Rav Shimi min Arda, really there's no chiyuv kofer in regel because it wasn't kavanos lahazik. And even if it's in the Chotzer Nizak. Betana and Rabbi Tarfon, who says that you pay Nezek Kofer Sholem and Karen and Chotzer Nizak, that's because Minizikin de Regel Maisila. So it's really not rooted in the Parsha of Kofer, but rather it's rooted in the Parsha of Nezikin. And Nizke Regel, which means that Regel is potter Rishus Rab and only chayav in Rishus HaNizak. So that makes it relatively kal. because in Karen you pay B'Shus HaNizak. I'm sorry, B'Shus HaRabim. And nevertheless, in Chutz HaNizak, despite the kula of regel as far as B'Shus HaRabim, Chutz HaNizak you pay Nezek Sholem. Karen is more chamur because Karen pays in B'Shus HaRabim as well. And therefore, there should be a din in Rishus HaRabim of Chatzi Kofer. And that can be derived from the Zikin of Regel. So Gemara raises the following objection. How could Rabbi Tarfon derive from this Kal V'chomer Tashlumi Nezek of Regel? Is going to teach me Kofer B'Keren in a case of the first three Negichas. V'lifrof, this should be a Pircha, this Kal V'chomer Mal in a Zikin de Regel, when you pay for Nizkei Regel, which is more Chomer, because you pay Nezek Sholem, in Chutz HaNizak Shekein, Yeshno Be'esh. So it seems that Nezikim, in the case of Regel, as opposed to, let's say, Eish, is you pay Tashlumi Nezek. But there's no Kofer in Eish. So therefore, he shouldn't be Chayav Kofer, or let's say Kofer Sholem, in the Chutz HaNizak. The Gemara answers, Mitamun. We're not going to darshan a Kal V'chomer from the Nezikin of Regel, but rather from this gate Tamun. That something that's Tamun is going to be Mechayev the Baal HaRegel to pay Nezek Sholem. So even though Keren is Kal in Rishus HaRabim, but nevertheless, you're chayev for the hezek of regel, nezek shalim and chatzar niza. And that would apply even if the nezek is betamun, which would be potter and eish, but the Torah is more machmer and regel. Now, Keren has the chumrah that you chayev chatzi kofer, even B'Shus HaRabim. So certainly you should pay Kofer Sholem in the Chutz HaNizak. So once again, there's no proof here to establish a Chi of Kofer and Regel. Because the Kal V'chomer is not from the din of Kofer, but really from the din of Nizkei Talmud. So Gemara asks, "For mal l'tomid shekein yeshno bebar." Kigon, he says in the footnote, in the name of Rashi, Gedi shenis galgil lebar kshuhu b'toch sak. So the Valabar pays for Talmud. So you want to build on the fact that Eish is Potter from Talmud, but what about the fact that Bar is Chayav in Talmud? So you can't learn a Kal V'chomer from Tashlume Nezek in Regel to Kofer and Keren Tama. And the Gemara answers, we're not trying to darshan a Kal V'chomer from Nizkei Talmud of Regel, but rather from Nizkei Kalim of Regel. So Regel is Kal, you're potter for the Hezek of Rishus HaRabim, and nevertheless you chayev for the Nezek in a Chutz HaNizak Nezek Sholem. And that chiyuv applies even if it's a Nezek to Kalim, which would be potter in Bar. And even in Talmud Be'esh, which would be potter in Eish. So Keren Hachamura, because we said that Karen pays Chatzi Kofer even in Rishus Harabim, certainly it should pay B'Chatza Nisa Kofer Sholem. So once again, there's no proof for the Chi of Kofer and Regel. The Kavachomer is not Midin Kofer, but Midin Niske Kelim B'Regel. So the Gemara asks, Ma L'Kelim Sheyeshna B'Eish. So you're building yourself on the fact that there's Niske Kelim. Yeah, well, Eish is Chayiv on Niske Kelim. And once again, as we said earlier, Kofer is not shaykh by age. And the Gemara answers, Mikelim Tmunim. We're going to derive this Kal V'chomer from Kelim Tmunim, of Regel. And sometimes it's going to be Potter. And in Eish, if it's Tomun, he's Potter. In Bar, if it's Kelim, he's Potter. But nevertheless, in Regel, he's going to be Chayav both for Tamun and for Caleb. So here's the Kal V'chomer. Ma Regel Hakala Shepturim Al Hezeka B'Shus Harabim. The Torah was Mekil in Regel B'Shus Harabim is Afal Piche, nevertheless Chayavim Al Nizka V'Chotza Nizak Nezek Sholem. Even if the nezek was to Kalim Tmunim, which would be Potter and Eish and Bar, is Keren. Hachamura, Shechayev es Chatzi Kofer, even in Rishus Harabim, is Vadai for sure, Sheteshalim V'Chotza Nizek Kofer Sholem. And once again, there's no proof here for the Chi of Kofer B'Regel. The Kal V'chomer is not from the Chiyuvim of Tashlumei Kofer, but from the Chiyuv of Tashlumei Nizek in Kelim in Regel. So Gemara asks the Kasha, we still have a pirch on this Kal V'chomer. How could Rabbi Tarfon darshan this Kal V'chomer from Tashlumei Nizek B'Regel to Kofer B'Keren Tama? Ma Kelim Tmunim Sheyeshna B'Adam. If you had hidden Kelim and the Adam was Mazik, he would be chayav. And yet there's no chayav kofer if there was misal yedei adam. So the Gemara concludes, Elalav shmami, we have to derive from all these kashas that kofer de regel maisi lo. Rabbi Tarfon darshan the Kal V'chomer to be mechayav kofer sholem in Keren Tama, in Chotza Niza. And that's going to be derived from the Chi of Kofer Regel. Therefore, the Gemara comes to the final conclusion that Alma we see, without any doubt, that Ika Kofer Beregel, Shma Mino. Omalei Rav Achami Difti Liravina, Hochinam Mistab. The Ika Kofer Beregel, I'm going to prove to you that logically there should be Kofer and Regel if a Regel kills a Tino. To Isal, you're going to raise the possibility that Leka Kofer Beregel. V'atana, nevertheless, Rabbi Tarfon is Machayev Keren B'Chotza Nizek B'Kofer Sholem, even in the case of Keren Tama, because we're going to interpret like Rav Shimi Minarda that Nezikin de Regel Maisi Law. The Rabbi Tarfon derives the din of Kofer B'Chatzi B'Chotza Nizek from the Nezikin of Regel, and not from the din of Kofer B'Regel. Is then I'm going to ask you the question. Lifroch malin izakim the regel shekain yeshna beregel. So regel achamurim, because in chotzad nizak you're chayev nezek sholem. Kofer is kal, because you're potter from this chiyuv in regel even b'chotzad nizak. So we're not going to be mechayev keren tama b'chotzad nizak with full kofer. We must be deriving it from the Kal V'chomer of Regel, Kofer de Regel Maisi. He derives the din of Kofer Sholem B'Keren Tama in the case of Harga B'Chatzah Nizak From the Chiyuv of Kofa Beregel, Alma, we see clearly the Ika Kofa Beregel Shmami. And this leads us to the next mission of Adam Amaz. Adam Mudli Olam Bain B'Shogeg Bain B'Mezid. Bain Bain Yosher. So Adam Amazik is chayav straight across the board, whether it's Mezid or Shogeg, whether it's or Yoshem. And simas ein chavero v'shibras kelim mishalim nezek shel. So again, if he knocks out somebody's eye, even b'shogeg, or he breaks their kelim, he pays nezek sholem. He has the same status as a muad mitchilaso. So Gemara says, "Ketani simas ein chavero dumya d'shibras kelim." In one breath, the Mishnah brings down both simas eino and shibras esakelu. Is therefore we should equate the two. And ma hasav nezek in arba dvarim lo af simas eino is nezek in arba dvarim lo. Just like in the case of an adam who is mazik kelim, he only pays nezek. So there's no chiv to pay tzar ripu shevus and boshes. And therefore, we should assume by analogy that simas ein chavero, he knocked out his eye b'shogeg, is nezek in, he pays nezek, but avad dvarim lo. Now, to understand this havamin in the Gemara, we can explain the following. That the din of Ripui, Sheves, etc., is derived from the pasuk v'chiyarivun anoshim v'hikas ish esrei, and that indicates mezid, or at least karov lemezid. But simas ein chavero is talking about shogeg, and therefore he doesn't pay arba dvarim.